This time on the Plutopia Podcast, histories are explained, dark secrets revealed, and dangers examined. Jon details the history of Plutopia and the Plutopia News Network. Scoop reveals his love for all things analog, and we discuss the conservative attacks on democracy.
Hey, welcome everybody to yet another Plutopia News Network podcast episode featuring yours truly, John Lepkowski, and that strange man over there, Sweeney.
I
Hey,
resemble
Scoop.
that remark, strange though I be.
And we're here to talk about nothing in particular and, potentially anything and everything.
That works for
But I
me.
think one thing we could talk about that we seldom talk about, haven't talked about enough, is why we call ourselves Plutopia.
Well, tell us all. You have the deep story for the secrets of Plutopia and its international conspiracy.
Yeah, I first heard of Pluto as a dog belonging to Mickey Mouse. And then later I discovered that there was also a planet called Pluto. And it's interesting that I found out about the dog before the planet.
And it's no longer a planet.
And then, that is debatable.
Picky.
And we should invite an astronomer in here someday to talk about the ins and outs of determining whether a celestial object is a planet or not.
We should do a cage match between an astronomer and an astrologer.
That's not a bad idea. If we could find the right astronomer and the right astrologer, that could work. So I was going to say, the first time I saw the word Plutopia, it was on a cartoon featuring Pluto the dog, Pluto pup. And I've heard the term since then, and it has kind of an otherworldly feel to it because, of course, there is Plutopia. There is Pluto, the planet. And if you search online for Plutopia, there's a book about, or there's a book called Plutopia. And it was written, I think about, it's called Nuclear Families, Atomic Cities. Wait a minute. Nuclear Planets, Atomic Cities, and the Great Soviet and American Plutonium Disasters. Now, why she didn't call it Plutonia instead of Plutopia, I don't know, but that was written by Kate Brown. And I have not read the book, but I've certainly encountered it many times while I was banging around looking for stuff related to our particular enterprise. But the word Plutopia, as we use it for the Plutopia News Network, would have come up in probably 2007. Was it 2007 or 2008? Were you at the meeting where that happened, Scoop?
No, I was a
Or
late
did you
comer
come in
there.
later?
I came in at 2010.
Okay. So, some years ago, I would say 2005, which is almost 20 years ago, I was working with an organization called the Digital Convergence Initiative of Southwest Texas. And one of the things we were talking about was how digital convergence would affect the technopolis, using a term that George Kosmetsky had come up with at some time. Kind of like there's a concept of it's kind of related to economic development around technology, and I won't go into that too much right now. But as part of this digital convergence initiative, I was involved in a lot of brainstorms about what the impact would be of what we referred to as digital convergence, which was like all media and all information was being digitized and was becoming, accessible over computer networks. So there was this great digital convergence happening that's like well sunk in by now. Over the last 2 decades, this thing did happen. And well, you should remember, though, that our first conversations about this were in meetings prior to the creation of things like the iPhone. The iPhone was a big factor in the solidification of this whole concept of digital convergence. And Wi-Fi was not accessible in the way it is now. We were actually working on that. We were trying to get more and more Wi-Fi in more and more places. And there's a whole big story about that. We should invite Rich McKinnon sometime to talk about his idea for putting Wi-Fi in venues, which was widely adopted in Austin and then widely adopted across the country and the world. And I would argue that it all started with Rich, as his idea. But we were doing advocacy, really. We really wanted people to understand what was happening and to buy into it, and to and we also were operating as an economic development project because we saw Southwest Texas as one place where digital convergence could be a really big deal. It could really affect the local economies in Austin and San Antonio and elsewhere. And we were sponsored by the Austin San Antonio Corridor Council. So that's one thing to keep in mind, was that we were thinking specifically about that axis there between Austin and San Antonio, and then Houston as well. And in order to really effectively convey this idea of digital convergence, we thought about doing some kind of event. And we talked to our friends at South by Southwest, and it happened that they, in 2005, had some extra space in the exhibit hall, that would not happen today. That thing really fills up today. But at that time, they did have some space that they could give us. And we started talking about creating something kind of like the World's Fair back in the 1930s. It had this thing called Futurama. Well, we were thinking about creating our own Futurama, basically an installation that shows something about the future. And we could use convergence technologies that were already emerging, and then we could do some smoke and mirrors to kind of show where those were heading and what people could expect in the future. And we put together a group of local technologists and futurists or futurologists and people who really had a good sense of where things were going, people who were sort of on the avant-garde of this movement into the digital world. And we met regularly with whiteboards, and we made a bunch of plans, and we talked about things we could do. And somewhere along the line in this discussion, it occurred to us that this thing that we wanted to build within South by Southwest, as great as the idea might be, was going to take more time to build and more time to actually draw sponsors than we had before the event. So we were kind of in a quandary. What can we do? We really can't build the thing that we've been talking about building. And we decided instead to throw this huge party, which we had at, I think it was the Austin Ballet Theater. They agreed to let us use their space. And we threw this big party there. And the real centerpiece of that that was related to digital convergence was high definition video transmission from San Antonio to Austin. And my recollection is that it was a video of a live performance by Grupo Fantasma. I think I've got that correct. Anyway, we did have this live video thing, which, I mean, to now you wouldn't bat an eye at something like that, but back then nobody had, we didn't have high definition television on everybody's wall. We didn't have flat screens everywhere. So it was kind of a big deal. And we had technical issues, but we managed to get it to work ultimately, and it was pretty cool. So we were, after all of this, having another conversation that was kind of a debrief after South by Southwest and the party and so forth. And it's like, wow, that was pretty cool. Now what? And I had this idea. I said, this would have been sort of like, we were operating like a think tank. And if you had a think tank that produced events instead of like white papers, that could be pretty interesting. That could be a pretty cool thing. So we decided to take that ball and run with it. I was particularly talking to a local corporate futurist named Derek Woodgate as one of the people who was interested in doing this thing. And we had a lot of conversations about it and, kind of speculated about how it could work. And we started thinking about building an events company that would produce those kinds of events. And as an initial sort of dry run, kind of an attempt at showing what that might be like, we had the good fortune that, so I saw that Make Magazine was sponsoring something called Maker Faire out in the Bay Area. And I wrote my friend Mark Frauenfelder, who was an editor at Make, and I said, you could probably do something like that in Austin. And I thought that I was, unlikely to get much of a result from that. But in fact, they liked the idea and they decided they were going to do a Maker Faire here in Austin as a really big event here, So we decided that we could create an installation for that event. They agreed to give us a pretty decent amount of installation space. And we put our heads together, and Derek realized that, in his futurist work, he had done quite a bit of work on the idea of the house of the future. And we talked about how the house of the future would probably be highly configurable by the occupant. We started running with that idea, the idea that the house of the future will be whatever you want it to be, it will be somewhat malleable. And we built an installation around that, and it went off pretty well. So after that event, and David Damaris and I worked quite a bit on that. He did a lot of hard work to help us make that happen. And Bon Davis, who was a local guy who was a person who did stage work and was really good at helping us stage the thing. And there were several other people that they knew, and we had a number of volunteers who put this thing together and held it together, and it worked pretty well. And after the fact, after the event had happened, Derek and I and David Damaris and Bon and several of the other people who had been involved gathered to have a kind of debrief about what had happened and what the implications might be for creating some kind of an ongoing event and a company to produce events like that. And in that meeting, we talked more about this idea of having your space be configurable however you want it to be. And it was like somebody came up with this idea, this concept. It might have been me, I'm not sure. I know that the portmanteau was tossed out. It would be like pluralist utopias. And somebody else said, and I think it was Damaris, well, why don't you just call it Plutopia? So, what does that mean when we say pluralist utopias? Well, a pluralistic society is one where you have all kinds of groups and political parties and so forth, and they coexist peacefully, and they all have an active role in governing. And really, the idea is that everybody can kind of have their own thing. And this, we're moving in a real different direction right now. So I think this is even more important now. The idea that you can have people with a lot of different ideas, that they don't all have to think the same thing. They don't all have to follow the same religion. They don't all have to come from the same kind of cultural environment. But they can still work together. They can still coexist harmoniously. They can act in mutual respect, something that we don't see much of right now. They can keep conflict to a minimum, and people can go out and build their thing. And these groups or these individuals can build their own kind of utopia. Well, what is utopia? Utopia was conceived as sort of like the ideal place, right? Yeah, it comes from, like, Sir Thomas More published a book comparing England to this perfect imaginary country utopia. And the way he said it, everything that he felt was wrong in England was right in utopia. It was perfect. So he was trying to show that people could live together peacefully and they could be happy, and they could do that if they did what he thought was right. And the name Plutopia that he gave went along with the idea that he didn't really think that you could really reach that kind of perfection. And utopia is from the Greek ou, no, not, and topos, place, no place. In other words, there's no place that's perfect. So utopia is kind of like it's a vision that is probably not achievable, but an unachievable vision can still be relevant. It can still be important. It can still be important to have a sense of where you're going to go. I talk about how the U.S. has never really been a democracy exactly, and democracies are hard to do. But you can have a democratic intention, and that's better than having, an authoritarian or autocratic realm. I see that I've frozen again. We're having some technical issues today, but we're going to soldier through them. Anyway, so pluralist utopias would be like, you have this sort of ideal of the perfect pluralistic country where everybody's in harmony. It's probably not going to be achievable as such, but it's important to have that as a goal. It's important to have it as an intention. What do you think, Scoop?
So, it was nice to get involved with Plutopia back in 2010. Is when you and I kind of reconnected after many years of, we grew up together in the same little town in West Texas called Big Spring. And it was interesting to be involved in a Austin event. I spent many years doing big events and concerts in the Bay Area, Northern and Southern California. And I first realized how high-tech Austin was when I was part of a group that produced a anniversary celebration for advanced micro devices, and we set up a full concert stage in Sunnyvale at the AMD plant there, and brought in as an end of the tour party Rod Stewart, who was on a world tour at that point, and a lot of other really good entertainers were the opening acts, and we did a full blown arena style show that all the advanced micro devices employees and representatives and people they wanted to schmooze up to, they were all invited out there. And so they broadcast that live to the plant in Austin, and Austin was having a simultaneous show with Bruce Hornsby in the range. And they did a lot of live video, and I was amazed at the technology. Of course, AMD had the technology to be able to really do that, but it was quite interesting, and that's when I realized how much into technology you Austinites were. We thought, being in the Bay Area, we thought we had it, the whole market cornered in technology. It's not the case. That's just one of those ego things that areas geographic areas have egos too, and the Bay Area certainly has a big ego. But let's see.
Yeah.
Are you still? Oh, well, I'm I'm saying
I'm still here.
right? Okay, but it was nice getting involved with Plutopia, and I wish we could have continued with the events, but the reality at the end of the Plutopia events era was it became financially impossible for a local community group to really do that kind of thing in Austin during South by Southwest, because we were renting nice places like the Mexican American Civic Art Center by Lady Bird Lake, and all of a sudden the prices there went through the roof, and all the other places that were formerly very affordable became very unaffordable because South by Southwest became extremely successful, and all the big guys came in with big checkbooks and priced us out of the market.
Oh, my Lord. Yes.
So that was, unfortunate. But when Jon and I reconnected the Plutopia podcast and as the Plutopia News Network, then it became a whole different thing. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed it. We reconnected with the podcast in 2018, I guess it was. I'd been harassing Jon for a couple of years, actually, saying we need to get the podcast going again. Come on, Jon, come on. And he finally relented. I think I just wore him down. Did I wear you down?
Well, the problem was that we couldn't think what to call it. We were operating on it with the assumption that, because at the time that I left Plutopia while it still existed as a company, and some other people were still doing it. And I guess that probably went for another couple of years. And I kept thinking that we couldn't really use the name, but eventually the company went away and those people scattered to the wind, and you and I came back to it and said, well, let's revive Plutopia as Plutopia News Network. And once we had a name for the podcast, it felt a lot more doable to me.
Mm-hmm. It's been very doable. We've been talking about Plutopia, and I was going to bring up the fact that I have a confession to make, Jon, and I've always been heavily involved in digital technology, starting back from the early 80s when I first got my first little do-it-yourself personal computer, and got involved in the whole personal computer underground in the Bay Area. And I've been involved with a lot of technology products. I became a programmer and software supervisor for Kaiser Permanente's IT group in the Bay Area. But I've always been, I have to confess, a closet Luddite. I really like analog technology a lot. Hey, he's back. He's back. He's alive. Anyway,
I think it was the camera.
I'm a closet
I think my
Luddite.
camera was disconnected.
There you go. But I really like it. If you let me show you what I'm talking about. Switch to this other camera there. That stuff over there is a small part of my analog playground. A lot of albums, 45 RPM singles, videotapes, cassette tapes, all sorts of stuff. And I've got all the machinery to actually play those things. And I just, in fact, set off. There's a empty rack over to my right side here where my multi-track reel-to-reel recorder used to live. I just shipped that off to New York for where an engineer is going to completely redo it and get it. It's finally frozen up. So I'm going to spend a bunch of money getting that done for no other reason than the fact I really love playing with analog stuff. And in fact, my favorite meme lately is of a couple of young guys playing a vinyl record on a turntable. And the guy says to his friend, it's like Spotify, only you get to keep the music. And that's and that's kind of where I'm coming from, because a lot of the things in this rack of albums, I've gone and looked for some of those albums online. They don't exist because they were not mega superstars. So the record companies only put out a few copies. And if you didn't get it then, there's a good chance that it just never got transferred over to digital and put on a CD somewhere. And maybe if someone did like I've done, I've burned a lot of these to CDs. When I added that to my 2 internet radio stations, a lot of this music on the internet radio stations that I host online, they are actually recorded from the vinyl albums, and I used Pro Tools to go in and clean up any clicks and pops and boost the quality of it a little bit. But they sound really nice, and that's why I really still play a lot of vinyl albums. I'll go into my living room, sit there, and put on a nice vinyl album, and I play it through a tube preamp that sounds really big and fat and warm. And it's just, you have to be, I guess, an analog fan to appreciate a lot of people, just don't like it because you'll hear an occasional click or pop. But I've healed a lot of that because right behind me is a record washer. It's about $1,000 piece of equipment that VPI, I believe they're in New York, produced, and they've been marketing those for quite a while. And you can actually take that vinyl, and they have special fluids that you can put on the vinyl album and brush it on, and that scratchy, poppy record suddenly becomes like a new record. And the only time that you can't heal that click and pop of it, just gouge in the record. There's no coming back from that. But I've always been very, paranoid about the handling of my records. So I learned as a DJ back when I was working at our local radio station in Big Spring, Texas. I learned the hard way. I was being rough with the records, and the chief engineer comes in and just whacks me up back of my head and said, "Boy, that's not how you handle a record." He taught me about actually using white cloth gloves that didn't have a lot of lint on them and gingerly handling the records. And I did that whenever he was around, but normally I just was very careful. But that's why I just love that vinyl sound.
I get it. I mean, I kind of get it. I haven't really listened to vinyl in years, but from my perspective, I think a lot of the concern that you're talking about the sound of digital audio comes from the MP3 era. You know, MP3 was famously very lossy,
Yeah, it's by
and
definition a
you were
lossy.
missing stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's why
And there are some streaming services that are still lossy too.
yeah,
But I listen to Apple Music, which has a lossless format, and it sounds pretty good.
yeah. I of course listen to a lot of digital resources as well. I'm not a total let out. I just like to uh, have little guilty pleasures, and that's one of them is having a lot of analog entertainment around, and it just one of those things that goes back to when I managed and recorded with a band for about 10 years in the 1980s. So we recorded at some of the greatest studios, in the music business, that Sound City in LA and A&M Records, and multi-track recording then was, it was a chore and it was expensive, but I just really loved the process. And that's basically how I mix the audio on this podcast is I do multi-track recording, and I have a sound file for you, a sound file for me, a sound file for our guest that I can independently massage, because we're talking about sound sources from 3 or 4 different computers, 3 or 4 different internet connections, 3 or 4 different microphones. So it's all going to be different, but with a little technology, digital technology, of course, I can massage the sound where it comes out really nice and even. And I do it, the recordings are all done in as a FLAC file, which is the lossless format. And it's nice, but I still like to occasionally get on the old reel-to-reel because there's a certain thing called tape compression, tape compression, where you overdrive a tape recording and it gets a really fat, nice, warm sound, because a lot of people would never go into the red when they were recording on a tape recorder. That was supposed to be bad, but actually I always would bounce up into the, when I was doing vocals, I would bounce up into the red because it sounded better. And that's one of the dirty little secrets.
You don't get distortion?
You do.
Or is it the distortion that actually improves the sound?
It's not really distortion until if you peg it all the way over, then yeah, you're going to distort. But if you're careful and you use some audio compression as well, you can keep it there to where it's really a much fatter and warmer signal on your recording. So that's part of my dirty little thing. I hide from the neighbors and turn on my record player and my tape recorders. You don't want them to think that they've got a Luddite next door. I fooled them.
So what made you decide what made you decide to have a podcast?
To have it's just kind of a natural progression of stuff I've done before. I just like recording people. My first job, in radio in Big Spring was as an intern for the legendary Texas broadcaster Tumbleweed Smith. He was known as Bob Lewis back then, but he
Who just had a birthday, by the way.
just had a birthday, and he's when we first started the Plutopia News Network podcast, I did a session with him at one of his live shows out in Brady.
I remember.
He had already done 10,000 episodes. Imagine doing 10,000 daily radio shows. He goes out with his.
We'll get there. We'll get there.
He goes out with his recorders and travels all over Texas and just finds interesting people who have something to say. And he's been doing that.
And that's kind of what we've done.
Yeah, he's been doing that since 1969. And so that was.
We've done it, but we've traveled all over cyberspace.
Exactly. So, yeah, having been influenced by that guy and by working in radio for Pacifica Radio and KPFT in Houston, KPFA in Berkeley, and working for Zodiac News Service, I got to record a lot of people, interesting people, and it just it's just something I enjoy doing. I would rather just have someone else be talking, because I'm not that great a public speaker. I can babble like anyone, but I enjoy getting the words of interesting folk that you may not ever have a chance to encounter in person. But if I can share their words with you electronically, that's what really floats my boat.
I guess our strength and our weakness both is that we like to have kind of jam sessions here. When we do have a guest, I do a lot of preparation, and I think that I am more focused than I am in a session like this, where we just decided we were going to hang out and talk. Though I did some preparation today, and I was pretty clear about what things I might want to talk about, but I didn't really have a definite plan to talk about a specific thing.
Yeah.
One of the things that on my list was what I already talked about, but I have others too, and I can draw on that.
Yeah, well, I'm not a big preparer. I usually like to fly by the seat of my pants, and my pants are getting kind of worn from doing that. But I prepared today. I brushed my hair a little bit. What you see my hairstyle here? So
I do kind of wonder what other people are I wonder what other people are like, how they respond to our shows. I know, we have more and more followers, especially on YouTube. I'm not sure how many people have us loaded in their podcast app. I'm sure I can find a stat for that. But we have a number of people who are listening to us, and I would not mind hearing from people who are listening, like to this particular podcast, and kind of let us know what you'd like to hear from us, and what you like and don't like about what we're doing. Because we're rough around the edges, partly because we don't try to be disgustingly professional about our discussions here.
Yeah,
a discussion, a conversation. Yeah, it can feel contrived if you prepare too much for it. I know. There's probably all kinds of issues with the conversations that we've had, but we always have fun. Our guests have fun. I hope the listeners are having fun too.
Well, we get listeners commenting on our YouTube channel. I go in and read the comments every day, and they're not a huge number of comments, but people that really appreciated something we did will come up and make a comment on the YouTube comments, and it's nice to hear that or see that.
Yeah. I think that if someone was to go back through our body of work and listen to, or just kind of review the work that we've done, the podcasts that we've recorded over time, I think you find that it's pretty rich.
Yeah,
and we've had a real diversity of guests.
If you page through our YouTube channel, you can view all of our episodes, all the way back to the first one back in 2018, because I've loaded those up as YouTube videos. The initial ones were just audio with some digital displays to replace, because we weren't doing the camera versions that we do now. But it's interesting to see all the people that we've had, some really important people, interesting people that had something meaningful to say.
Does that include the recordings from 2011?
Some of them, yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
We have one, our friend. First one was our friend Ed Ward, the late Ed Ward. We have his stuff on
Yeah.
future of music and future of food from back when he was living in France. And we have a few of those, but mostly it's stuff from 2018 on.
Well, that's great. I don't really go back and listen to those podcasts very often, and when I do, I'm always surprised. Just always surprised at what we were able to capture.
Yeah, and we've
And
been
I think we'll
to
do.
highlight some important issues that only now are becoming, even, more obvious, problems. We've been talking about, privacy and security and things like that, and the mainstream media are finally starting to pick up on that.
And we could and probably should talk more about the challenges of and to democracy, because that's a very compelling conversation right now, and we're in danger of losing any intention to be democratic. We have a set of people. We have a set of people who believe that America should be a country that is dominated by one culture and one religion and one race, really, essentially a monoculture.
Yeah.
And I understand. I mean, I've spent my life around people who are Christians, and I understand that Christians have a very strong belief that theirs is the way, even if they don't really care too much for that Christ guy, who was so weak and
most
preached
religions
all that stuff about.
Most religions say that. I mean, if you talk to the hardcore of many religions, theirs is the only way. So it's
Yeah.
it's not related just to Christians, but they're ones that have been making the most noise lately. And just the news today with Mr. and Mrs. Alito talking to a troublemaker who got into a party a meeting they were attending in Washington, and the guy asked him if America, I think I'm paraphrasing, should the United States be a Christian nation? And they pretty much gave it up. Yeah, let's go do that. And that's our Supreme Court.
And of course, if they were really Christians, if they were true Christians, they wouldn't feel that they have to dominate.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
And they
love
wouldn't feel
everyone.
that they have to. Yeah. I don't know. I'm a bit riled lately, and I know other people who are riled, but I think that we have to suppress our tendency to feel outraged. And I mean, it's important to have compassion. And it's important to have compassion for your enemies as well as your friends, And what compassion means is not just, it's not the same as empathy. It's more than empathy. It doesn't just mean that you acknowledge that other people are having a hard time, but it also means that you'd like to do something to help them have less of a hard time. And I actually think that the people who we are outraged about, the people on the far right, who are at this moment trying to dominate the politics and governance of this country, I think that they are very troubled people. I think that they are in a lot of pain. I don't think that they would be as they are otherwise. I think Donald Trump is in constant, persistent pain. He must have a terrible life and a terrible time. And people may think he's having a wonderful time. There's no way. That guy's having a really bad time.
These people that want to, basically roll back culture to the 1950s, it was always just a monoculture then. It was, if you weren't white and conservative, you were out of power. And there are a lot of people that looked to those as the good old days, when they didn't have to be politically correct and didn't have to think of other cultures and other religions and other races in a positive manner. They were just interested in being in power again. And that's something I've noticed is it's particularly evident in older folk, people of our generation who didn't grow up with a progressive outlook on things, tend to do that old dance of let's go back to the 50s. It's like, no, let's not.
Yeah.
I lived them once.
Make America great again. Put women back in the kitchens where they belong.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one, especially with the guys who, just couldn't deal with relationships that were equal. It was like, I'm the man and you shall deal with it. It's, no wonder you don't have
Right.
relationship.
The whole thing about ending reproductive freedom is not about protecting babies. It's about controlling women.
Exactly.
And if you've read The Handmaid's Tale, well, I haven't read The Handmaid's Tale, but I know what it's about. I know what the idea is. Yeah. I mean, the idea is that women exist to have babies and make dinner, and that they have no business trying to think for themselves or do anything else. And it's, it's as you say, it's a rollback to the 1950s. And people didn't, that's not really the way the world was back then. It's a fantasy, I mean, my mother wasn't a weak woman who just hung out in the kitchen.
Yeah, it's same with mine.
I don't think yours was either.
She was a old school teacher from Oklahoma, and she did not tolerate that kind of behavior. I mean, she was a good homemaker. That's just what you were supposed to do. But she had an interest outside of the home that kept her involved in the community. And I knew a lot of my friends' mothers were the same way. Then there were others who were just totally suppressed and repressed, and you never saw them, they show up in public and they're walking behind their hubby because that's the way you're supposed to do if you're a subservient female. That was just really sad to see people doing that.
I can't imagine it. I can't imagine that we could actually go back there. I mean, there's a lot of concern on the part of people like us, who, we kind of skew to the left, or, we're not aligned with any of that really right-wing thinking.
Yeah, it's just
and we're not aligned with the idea of male dominance either.
Yeah, well, the whole thing of the 50s,
and
I remember being that the Russians wanted to kill us. They said so. And now we're back to that, deja vu. We got a Russian guy that wants to kill us again.
Well, as much as I worried about the Russians back then, I didn't worry about them anywhere near as much as I'm worried about them right now.
Especially when we have a guy running for president who thinks that Russian guy, Putin, is a genius. It's like, no.
Putin's fingerprints are all over that guy. Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, that's one other thing I was going to do. This has been in the media a lot lately, and I thought I would just read it verbatim, what Trump said, a couple of days ago.
Oh, please do.
I'm sure you've heard this one. I say, what would happen if a boat sank from its weight and you're in the boat and you have this tremendously powerful battery and the battery's now underwater and there's a shark that's approximately 10 yards over there? By the way, a lot of shark attacks lately. Do you notice that? I watched some guys justifying it today. Well, they weren't really that angry. They bit off the young lady's leg because of the fact that they weren't hungry, but they misunderstood who she was. These people are crazy. He said, there's no problem with sharks. They just didn't really understand a young woman swimming. No, really, got decimated, and other people too. A lot of shark attacks. So I said, there's a shark 10 yards away from the boat, 10 yards or here. Do I get electrocuted if the boat is sinking? Water goes over the battery, the boat is sinking. Do I stay on top of the boat and get electrocuted? Do I jump over by the shark and not get electrocuted? Because I will tell you, he didn't know the answer. He said, you know, nobody's ever asked me that question. I said, I think it's a good question. I think there's a lot of electric current coming through the water. But you know what I'd do if there was a shark or you get electrocuted? I'd take the electrocution every single time. I'm not getting near the shark. So we're going to end that. We're going to end it for boats and we're going to end it for trucks.
No more electricity. All right. Henry Ford is.
Yeah,
Henry Ford's in the grave going, right on, brother.
Everybody's TV set will be powered by sharks.
Yes. Good Lord. Yeah, I think. I can't.
No.
I can't improve on what you just did there.
He's a young and vigorous guy. He's a very young 77.
Yeah, I did post
compared to Biden's very old 81.
Yeah, my friend in the Bay Area, Dan Earhart, posted a meme, no, not a meme, but a picture of a boat that's floating in the San Francisco Bay. It says Alcatraz prison transport, and it's got the Trump balloon in it, with it's something you must see. I'm sure if you go and look for it online, you will find that.
I believe I saw it. Yeah.
Yes. And one would hope that's the case, but with Hunter Biden being convicted today, that Trump is going to be using that. The Biden family is a bunch of criminals. Like, no.
Well, I think what I heard them say today is that, well, so what? They convicted him of this minor crime, but they're not doing anything about the Biden crime family.
They have
whatever that means.
Oh, I think that's.
And meanwhile, nobody's done much about the Trump crime family.
Well, I tell you, I think that's probably a good way for us to bow out of this episode, because I can't improve them.
Yeah, let's do it.
Here. And you're going to be heading off for a little rest and relaxation, and I'm going to probably be doing the same thing. So we will
I'm going to be at 9,000 feet.
Oh, getting high again, huh?
Up in the mountains. Yeah, up in the mountains. Right on.
Well, enjoy.
Okay, well, I will see you when I return.
And I will return when I see you. So have a good one, and we'll see you later.
Right on. Adios.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lepkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.